Hello and welcome back to AP U.S. History Online in the flipped classroom at Cleveland High School for Unit 1, Section 2, English Colonization in Jamestown. Okay, taking a quick bit. The full PowerPoint is online. This is just a snippet of what's going on. Okay, why did England travel over to the New World? Well, there were some mid-century changes in the status quo. Elizabeth I refused to marry King Philip of Spain, so that kind of strained relations between England and Spain. So England was trying to get away, that type of thing. That's something that's going on right now in England. There was a Spanish threat to the power structure for Europe, European military with a little thing called the Spanish Armada. A couple ships, maybe. We'll learn about Armageddon here shortly. There was an increased sense of English nationalism. People were beginning to become more, hey, we can stand alone here. We don't need to be with anybody, Spain, France, etc. We're English. Duh. Okay. That nationalism feeling is starting to grow a little bit. Elizabeth I really grabbed England by the horns and really started to power it up. So England was really becoming a force to be reckoned with under Elizabeth I. And there was a huge push for commercial middle class, kind of like here in the United States now, and available venture capital, which means there were people that were putting money into businesses in England to get them started, startup money, so to speak. So there was a big middle class push. So they're trying to figure out, hey, what's over there? So that's what's pushing England right now. Mercantilism. Mercantilism is something you'll hear a lot in this unit. The definition of mercantilism is a nation's power is measured by its wealth. Okay, so the more you have, the more powerful you are. You believe that? I don't know. Let's talk about the USSR later. Okay, there's a finite amount of wealth in the world. You can't go in and make more money. If you make more money, then the value of the dollar drops. So there is a finite amount of money as far as the world is concerned. So you need to establish kind of a balance of trade, favorable balance of trade. That's why the colonies are important. England really wants to go over and start a colony in the New World to start trading back and forth. Remember La Navidad from Columbus. The Spanish tried to do it. England really wants to make it successful because the more resources you have, the more colonies you have, the more wealth you have. Okay. So, like I said, colonies exist for the benefit, for the good of the mother country. More raw materials, more timber, number one, and that sort of things. Market for the manufactured goods in England. They make stuff. Only so many people buy things in England, so they want to ship them overseas so that more people buy them, kind of like now. And England's very overpopulated right now, so they need to send folks over. Hey, you're the lesser of the lesser. Hey, you're going over to the New World. We don't want you here in England. Okay, so mercantilism really kind of fired up exploration, so to speak. Sea dogs in the Spanish Armada. Elizabeth I really encouraged sea dog raids on Spanish ships, which means basically pirate ships. You go take over a Spanish ship and you take over all of the things that are in it. Kind of like Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh. Those guys were merchants, okay, trying to get those sea dog goods off Spanish ships. He just was like, Drake was like, see ya, you got it, it's mine. He was one of the world's first pirate. Then he was the first Englishman to circumnavigate the world. He explored actually as far as San Francisco. If you think about that side of California, he came over all the way over there. So that's not too shabby for an Englishman. Don't take it personally. He did, however, take a treasure ship off the coast of Peru that returned almost a profit of $9 million. Okay, Elizabeth the first share was almost a $4,600 profit from where England started before the sea dog raids. 4,600%. That's not a typo. 4,600%. That's not bad. Okay, so they're trying to get money to go sail away. We'll break off and go Christopher Cross on you. Start singing. Sail away. Okay, I'm not going to do it. Okay. Armageddon. Spain was not too happy with what's going on with England, so they tried to invade England. Okay, they sent 130 ships, over 7,000 sailors, 17,000 man invasion army. You think that's pretty good, right? You think Spain's got a pretty decent chance? It was a week-long engagement. About a half of the British Armada was destroyed. It helped that a hurricane went through, but the Brits fought off the other half. They had better ships, better guns, they had better sailors, and instead of boarding the ships, which is what the Spanish were trying to do, they were sinking the Spanish ships. So instead, you think about it. The Spanish boards a ship, the English ship's still there. England, they sink a Spanish ship, that's not there anymore. So the tactic for the Brits were not, we don't want to take it, we want to sink you. We want to show you who's boss. Okay, so that's why I call that Armada. Okay, what's the significance? This is one of the most famous paintings of the battle between the English and the Spanish. It really marked the end of the Spanish exploration run, and it also marked the beginning of English naval dominance. The English Navy was one of the most powerful naval units until the United States came along. Also, the Spanish at this point were pretty much the dominant European power. England showed at this point, Spain, it's time to give up the ghost. We're overtaking you. So England actually moved ahead of Spain in the European power structure. And it also encourages the establishment of colonies. Because think about it, if you're going to go across the street and a car is going to come hit you, you're not going to want to go across the street. But if you take the battery out of that car, and that car can't move, you have freedom across the road. I know it's a real crude analogy, but that's basically what happened after the defeat of the Spanish Armada. So, these are the motives I want you to know for English exploration. Now, the English really, really wanted to get rid of some of their overpopulation. So they started what's called the enclosure movement. They were enclosing in all of the area. And Sir Thomas More actually called that the sheep ate men in there. Because, if you think about a sheep out in a pasture, it eats its, 2-3 times its weight in the pasture land. But you enclose all of the little cities and towns that are in England, and the sheep are now brought inside. Sheep are now eating just basically eating the people out of house and home. They call that the enclosure movement, okay? Inflation was high, wages were low. They're trying to get people out of England so that England's economy can improve. There was a market for woolens. There was lots of woolen goods in England, and they wanted to sell it elsewhere because they knew the Native Americans would probably want that. So they're trying to create more economic boon in England, so to speak. Gold. We talked about it in the last lecture. Everybody wants the almighty little gold nugget. Hey, gold is number one, right? So yeah, they want to try to go over there and get gold. Raw materials. Is this a mercantilistic advantage? I would think so. Because raw materials, you can build more ships at the time, so the more raw materials you have, the better mercantilistic society you are. So I think the raw materials of the colonies of the New World, rather at this time, were definitely a mercantilistic advantage. Search for Northwest Passage. Passage for you go up and come down through the Hudson River, come down through there. So the English wanted an easier way to come in through that neck of the woods, up through Newfoundland. They call that the Northwest Passage. As we go forward into this unit, I'll talk to you more about the Northwest Passage. And missionaries. Protestant missionaries versus Catholic missionaries. They wanted religious freedom. They wanted to leave from religious persecution, hence the Puritans and the Mayflower coming over. That was another motive of exploration. Get me the heck out of here. I'm tired of being persecuted. And plus it's a sense of adventure. Free land. No one's claimed it. If you're here and fighting for land in England, you want a place to go get some free land. And this is a way to do that by going over to the New World. It's several months of travel, so if you're willing to put up with that and get a free plot of land, ain't bad. If your family could get a free plot of land here, wouldn't you do it? I would think so. So those were some of the motives for English exploration. So there were a couple of attempts at first. Sir Humphrey Gilbert died at sea trying to go over there. But there's one guy I think you might recognize his name. Yeah, that guy. Sir Walter Raleigh did establish the Roanoke Island colony, but he left, came back, and it went poof. The Croatan carved onto the tree, that sort of thing, where they believe Virginia Dare and all of the other settlers were either absorbed into the Indian tribes there or they were killed outright. A lot of people believe that the Lumbee Indians actually took in the Dare family. But anyway, you know that story. But the Jamestown colony was the first successful English colony on the New World. Okay, it was a joint stock company. All these guys got together. They joined together with stock in the. If Jamestown did well, they did well. So that's why I call it a joint stock company. That's what kind of settlement it was. Parliamentary control of money, which means England still controlled the money of the colony. For better or for worse, that doesn't last for very long. Okay. Personal financing really was risky. Sir Walter Raleigh, when he came over here for the Roanoke Island colony, he lost almost $100,000, which if you think back in the 1600s, that's a lot of dough. Okay, so it was very risky, but you have to spend money sometimes to make money, and that's one of the precursors of the mercantilistic society. And that's the 400-year logo from Jamestown there. Okay, so May of 1607, Jamestown was established. There's about 100 Englishmen on a ship. There were about 45, 46 people that would have been there to help, but they died on the boat right over. So it was not very fun. They had not a whole lot to eat, not a lot to drink. When they landed on Jamestown, it was very swampy, right there on the James River, and drinking water was bad. Mosquitoes were there causing malaria and yellow fever. You think about it, standing water at your house, and you leave it, and mosquito eggs form, and they have mosquitoes. It's bad. So they tell you if you see standing water, you dump it. You can't dump the James River. So they didn't really pick a great spot to find Jamestown. Bad water, bad mosquitoes. But hey, it's there. Gentlemen wasted a lot of time looking for gold. These guys had probably never done manual labor in their life. And they were like, we want to find gold. We don't want to dig a latrine. We don't want to do things we really need to do, like find water. Duh. Okay? So these guys spent more of their time trying to find gold than doing the things you need to do to have a successful settlement. Like shelter. That'd be the first thing this boy would build, somewhere to lay my head at night. That gold's going to be there in the morning. I got to find a place to lay my head. That's just me. Okay? Big issue. There were 0 women on this ship. It takes several months to get over to the New World. How are you going to populate the species, populate the colony, if you don't take women? Yeah, didn't really think about that one. Okay, so 0 women on the initial ship to Jamestown. This is a little clip I want to show you really quickly. Bear with me as I pull it up. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There we go. Enjoy it. It's about 5 minutes long.
Jamestown, Virginia, the site of the first permanent English settlement in North America. A colony that is almost completely abandoned, except for a dramatic piece of good timing. The colonists who sailed up the James River in May of 1607 arrived nearly a dozen years before the Pilgrims. Half are high-born gentlemen, the rest craftsmen and laborers. They have come not to escape persecution, but to make money. Every previous British attempt to found a colony has ended in death and disaster.
The thing about the Jamestown story that really grabs anybody is the incredible odds that were against them.
The colonists run into trouble almost immediately. Native tribes launch a flurry of attacks, and low-lying Jamestown Island proves to be a breeding ground for disease.
And so what you have by August is just people dying pretty much every day. You have malnutrition, dysentery, typhoid. The list is really appalling.
In this time of crisis, a veteran soldier of fortune named John Smith assumes control. He's able to stabilize relations with the Indians and trade for much-needed food. But his heavy-handed style of leadership is controversial.
John Smith is a polarizing figure in the colony. He has a core of people who are intensely loyal to him, who believe that he's the only one who can keep them alive. There's other people who just hate him, and the hatred is just off the charts.
Smith's life is famously saved by the Indian princess Pocahontas when he is threatened with execution by her father, Chief Powhatan. But the storied romance between them is only a myth. Jamestown's darkest hour is the winter of 1609-1610, known as the Starving Time. It comes after the Indians discover that John Smith has returned to England.
John Smith was really the one English colonist that they feared and respected. The natives quickly realize that they can act against the English without any fear of repercussions anymore. Chief Powhatan decides that instead of a frontal attack on the colony that would cause him to lose men, he'll simply starve the colonists out. And that's what he proceeds to do.
And the survivors talk about the terrible things that they had to resort to eating, including their shoe leather. They had to eat the rats that had come over on the ships. They had to eat the cats they brought to catch the rats.
A colonist named Hugh Price becomes unhinged by the situation, and he walks out into the middle of the public square and cries out, "There is no God." And then he walks out the gate of the fort, and he's found a few days later. His body's full of arrows, and his flesh has been eaten by wolves. The colony had started the year with 500 or so people. By the end of the Starving Time winter, in March of 1610, they were down to 60 people.
There is a move to abandon Jamestown. The colonists actually sail away. But less than a day later, they run into a fleet of ships bearing new settlers under the command of Lord Thomas Delaware, who declares Jamestown shall not be abandoned. Everyone turns around, and by that slender thread, the colony survives.
Jamestown's no longer on the brink of extinction. There's going to be challenges ahead, but Jamestown is going to survive.
Okay, what is that? Anyway, I'll ask you later because I want to go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so deeper look at Jamestown. That was a pretty good synopsis about what happened throughout the whole.
On the road for history.
I don't care what you're on the road for. Okay, anyway, back to where we were. Deeper look at Jamestown. The London Company formed and divided into the Plymouth and Virginia companies. Plymouth obviously went up to Plymouth Rock for the Pilgrims, and then Virginia Company actually came down and became Jamestown. December 1606, the Godspeed, the Susan Constant, and the Discovery. Know those three. It's in green. Remember, if it's in green, you got to know them. Leave for England. May 14th of 1607, 120 people land, 104 settle. Okay, there was an Indian attack on May 26th and only left 38 people alive after the first 6 months. Okay, so it's kind of rough right now. It's kind of chancy. Remember I told you it was colonized in not a really good area. It was in a very swampy area. So not only was that bad for survival, but the Indians knew the land. Okay, it's kind of like when we went over to Vietnam. We were fighting on their territory. Okay, so John Smith. John Smith was this guy who was an amazing just leader, military guy. Now I told you that most of the gentlemen spent most of their time looking for gold. John wasn't real happy about that. Okay, he came in and said, "You don't work, you don't eat." That'd get my butt off the couch on a Sunday afternoon to go do work. He said, we'll be getting food, but you're not going to just eat our food for no reason. You got to work. You got to build things around the colony. Very skillful with Indian relations. He was very good at talking to the Native Americans. But periodically resupplied, but continued to have problems. England kept getting some stuff in here, but they weren't. It wasn't right. It wasn't really good. Think about it. If you were there at Jamestown in the middle of that fort, you had no private property. It was still all of that joint stock stuff. There was really nothing called yours. Very harsh discipline. There were, march to and from, back and forth to basically whip people into shape. So John Smith really was a slave driver, for lack of a better word. And they had no cash crop, right? The Indian, whatever food they had that was grown, the Indians gave to them. So they had nothing to grow their own to get money to support or to get things to trade with the other people there. So it was very difficult to establish themselves socially, politically, and economically. Okay. The Starving Time. You're going to read something else tonight about this, so make sure you pay close attention. Smith had to leave the colony to go back to England, much like Sir Walter Raleigh did with the Roanoke Island Company. He had to go back over there to get more supplies. When he left, it got so bad there because there's no one there to really kind of take care of the colony and to stave off the Indians. They were reduced to eating, and this was spelled the way it was actually written in a journal: dogs, cats, rats, and mice. Also snakes, toadstools, horsehide. And they even ate dead men and dead women. The reason they're called powdered women, think about the makeup that they were wearing. So it's kind of like powdered sugar now, for lack of a better word. So yeah, they were eating the corpses. That's pretty nasty. So 1610, Sir Thomas Gates came over there and found everything just so nasty. So they were like, fine, we're done. Close up shop. We're heading back to England. Kind of like what you saw in the video. But they ran into Lord Baron Delaware. Do you see a state maybe in that name? Delaware? He intercepts them and forces them back. He had supplies, 300 men, etc., etc. So Jamestown was almost deserted, but Delaware saved that. They were, really, it wasn't great, but with the new leadership of Delaware, it was a little bit more optimistic. And this was something that was written, I think is really cool. And to the adventurers, thus he writes, be not dismayed at all, for scandal cannot do us wrong. God will not let us fall. Let England know our willingness, for that work is good. We hope to plant a nation where none before hath stood. So there's this rallying cry that we're going to survive this. We're going to be all right. Okay. So what turned Jamestown around? A cash crop. John Rolfe came over and Pocahontas really helped crossbreed a hybrid of native tobacco and West Indian tobacco. And Jamestown went absolutely nuts. This was like the discovery of a millennia in this area. Everybody wanted this special hybrid. It grew everywhere. It was going on sidewalks, grave markers, everywhere. They grew it wherever there was a spot because the hybridization of this tobacco just went crazy. Stories of fantastic fortunes, right? Yeah, it's awesome. These tobacco it's going to be our pièce de résistance. Okay. Used for exchange. Hey, we'll take that hoe, meaning the implement, get your mind out of the gutter. We'll take those garden tools in exchange for this tobacco. Okay. Land butchery. They did not do crop rotation. They grew it and they grew it and they grew it until the land was dead and then they moved. Okay. James I over in England's like, I disapprove of smoking. Loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, and dangerous to the lungs. Amen, brother. But everybody else screw it. So, and it was doing well. Okay. So there was an Anglo-Powhatan War. The whites that were there, and I call it Chief Powhatan because that's the way the language was back then. You may see Powhatan, whatever, but I call him Powhatan. They had kind of a Jekyll and Hyde relationship. They were friends, not friends, two-faced, kind of, etc. So they were fighting off and on, and first one ended in like 1914. Pocahontas married John Rolfe, which kind of ended that deal. So Dad was kind of like, all right, we'll back off. You marry my daughter, we'll back off. But about 10 years later, the Indians struck again and killed 347 whites, including John Rolfe. So apparently Dad didn't stay happy too long. Okay, so Powhatan came in there and kind of beat the crap out of us. And then the second Anglo-Powhatan War, that was between 1644 and 1646, about 20 years later. There's still that tension between the whites and the Native Americans because they took their land, right? So the Indians were completely waxed. Very much banished from the Chesapeake Bay area because the English really fought them back this time. There was this notion that Indians and whites can never live together. Dogs and cats can't live together. So they were always a combatant, always an enemy. Okay. But the 3 Ds really did the Indians in: disease, disorganization, and disposability. Okay, they call them the 3 Ds: disease, disorganization, disposability. Look those up in my notes that are online, already posted. Okay, so other successful factors of Jamestown. There was the introduction of private property. The headright system is something you need to know. For every person brought to America, that person got 50 acres of free land. So if you took 3 people over, you got 150 land. That ain't bad. Okay, but sea captains were kidnapping children, drunks, etc., trying to get that extra land. So it was abused. It wasn't really used properly. And the primary purpose was not to distribute land, but it was to get an adequate supply of labor. Right? The land was kind of a trade-off. We wanted people here so we could have labor force, and you got 50 acres of land because of it. Okay, that was just a trade-off. because there were accounts, so many journals were found back in those days, just labor shortages. You needed to do this, but you didn't have the hands. You didn't have the man hours available. So the headright system really stepped up to help promote getting more labor force over here. Okay, political freedom, right? You didn't have to be under the charter of the Protestants or the Catholics over in England. Common law was there. The House of Burgesses, the first representative assembly in the United States, was developed in 1619. So they're beginning to become their own political force, their own political machine. The company actually sought to recruit fair and uncorrupt maidens. Okay, they didn't want these loose women, these flappers, whatever you want to call them. They wanted the stable environment, the women, the marrying kind, so to speak. So, 150 pounds of tobacco purchased you a wife back then. Gave you a right to build a house, no longer live in barracks. So if you had 150 pounds of tobacco, you can buy a wife, build you a house. And you also propagate the species. Okay. Some problems, however, indentured servants were introduced here. Indentured servants means if you had a debt to pay off, you were indebted to a lord for a while to pay off your debt. Yeah, that was kind of showing that the headright system was kind of ineffective because these debtors, were coming to pay off their land and pay off their debt and got land as a result. So there was a competition in philosophies between indentured servitude and the headright system. But black Africans became slave for life back then, back in the 1640s. So you think slavery in the 1850s, 1860s? No, slavery was here when we landed. Okay, when actually Columbus had slaves. Then there was still a labor shortage. Think about it. 2 out of 5 indentured servants, that should be an S there, died before they were finished. So they had a debt to pay. They died. They couldn't collect the debt. So they had to fix that. Slaves are more expensive than indentured servants. You had to pay for a slave. Indentured servants paying off something you've already given them. So yeah, that labor shortage is still around. But yeah, slaves were a lot more expensive than an indentured servant. But in 1680, only 7% of the population was a slave. So you can see what's coming. You can see that that's starting to build. And that's not one of our prouder moments in history. Really high death rate. 1619 to 1621, lost 200 of our population. 1,000 more arrived in 1621, but by the year, another 843 remained. So the death rate was still a problem. We're getting people in, but we're losing more than we're keeping. So that's kind of an issue. The king actually revoked the charter, and Jamestown became a royal colony, saying you guys can't police yourselves. You guys are stupid, so much corruption. I'm taking you back. You're my baby. Let me stroke your feet. You're my baby. I'll take care of you. It was directly controlled by the king, starting to set up the mentality of, wait a minute, we're being oppressed by the king, and we need to get rid of this. Okay. So the types of colonies, these 3 things you have to know: joint stock company, a proprietary colony, and a royal colony. Okay, I know I said 4, but there's another bullet coming here. Come to class prepared to discuss what each one of these colonies are. You need to know what these 3 are. It's in your reading. It's in your notes. Okay, if you can't, go to Google. It's there. Okay, I promise. That's all, folks. So make sure you finish reading up chapter 2. Make sure you understand the PowerPoint. Go back and read some of these things if you need to. My full PowerPoint's online, and my full lecture notes are there as well. So that's the end for Unit 1, Section 2. And I think we're having a ball. Take it easy.